I still remember how calm I felt at first, which is strange considering everything that came later. Calm can be a warning sign if you mistake it for safety. My name is Alina Cross, and for the first 6 months after I moved into the neighborhood, I made myself deliberately forgettable. I followed every HOA rule, trimmed the hedges twice as often as required, parked exactly where the lines were painted, and attended meetings only to listen. I learned very quickly that the HOA president, Karen Whitmore, didn't run the association the way normal people run organizations. She ruled it. Karen was around 50, tall and slim, always wearing a sharp red suit that looked more like courtroom armor than neighborhood attire, and the HOA badge on her chest sat perfectly centered, polished like a medal. She walked with her shoulders back and chin raised, as if the sidewalks were laid for her personal inspection. People stopped talking when she entered a room, not because they respected her, but because they feared becoming her next project. I watched how she operated. She never yelled. She didn't need to. Her power came from timing, paperwork, and the quiet threat of consequences delivered with a thin smile. She fined people for trash cans placed inches too far forward, for garden lights she claimed were visually disruptive, for cars parked overnight that technically weren't violating anything but somehow still ended up costing money. At meetings, she spoke uninterrupted, turning open discussion into lectures, while board members nodded like mannequins. I learned something important during those months. Karen hated unpredictability. She hated people she couldn't read, and she especially hated calm women who didn't react the way she expected them to. That's why she eventually noticed me. It started small, almost polite. A warning letter about my exterior lighting, despite the fact that it complied with the bylaws word for word. I responded in writing, attached photos, cited the clause, and thanked her for her time. No response. Then another notice appeared, this time questioning my fence alignment, followed by an inspection reminder that I never requested. Neighbors warned me quietly, telling me stories about Karen's grudges and how she never let things go once she decided someone needed to be corrected. I listened, smiled, and kept documenting. I wasn't trying to challenge her authority. I was trying to understand how she abused it. Authority like hers doesn't explode, it tightens. The pressure builds slowly, invisibly, until someone cracks. I had no intention of being that person. What I didn't realize was that my silence wasn't neutral. It was an insult. Karen didn't want compliance anymore. She wanted submission, and submission requires fear. That's when she escalated. She began showing up near my house without notice, standing on the sidewalk with her clipboard, pretending to review landscaping while clearly watching my windows. She scheduled inspections during work hours, then noted my absence as uncooperative behavior. Still, I stayed quiet. I answered everything in writing. I installed cameras, legally, visibly, without announcement. Karen smiled wider every time she saw them, as if daring me to rely on them. What I didn't know yet was that she already believed she was untouchable, and people who believe that don't stop at fines or letters. They cross lines. They convince themselves those lines were never real to begin with. That realization came on a Tuesday evening I wasn't supposed to be home. The lights were low, the house quiet, and my suitcase still sat by the door because I had returned early from a work trip without telling anyone. At around 8:15, I heard the sound that changed everything. Metal scraping inside my front door lock, slow and deliberate, followed by the unmistakable click of a turning key. Not a knock, not a ring. Someone was unlocking my door. My body went cold before my mind caught up, because burglars don't usually have keys, and neighbors don't let themselves in unannounced. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The door opened slowly, carefully, like whoever was entering expected an empty house. And then I saw her. Karen Whitmore wearing that red suit, her HOA badge gleaming, a flashlight in one hand and her phone in the other, recording. She didn't see me at first. She whispered to herself, confident, almost pleased, saying she finally had proof. That was the moment I understood the truth. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about safety. This was about power, and Karen believed it followed her anywhere she chose to walk, even through my locked front door. After her cat died, everything about Karen shifted in a way I couldn't immediately name, like a room that looks the same but feels colder the moment you step inside. I expected rage, lawsuits, screaming, something loud and vindictive, because that was the version of her I knew, the woman who weaponized rules and thrived on confrontation. But instead, she arrived with a softness that crawled under my skin, her voice low and syrupy, her posture relaxed, her eyes unreadable. She told me accidents happen, said fate was cruel, said she was trying to heal, and the way she smiled never quite reached her eyes, as if the muscles there had forgotten how. I apologized until my throat ached, offered to pay vet bills, grief counseling, even to help her adopt another animal if she wanted, and she waved it all away like spare change, telling me to focus on my farm and my responsibilities. For a while, I believed her. Days passed in an unnatural quiet. The HOA emails stopped entirely. No warnings, no fines, no Karen pacing my fence line with her clipboard like a border patrol officer. Neighbors whispered that grief changes people, that loss humbles even the cruelest personalities, and I let myself believe that my calm had finally disarmed her. To show responsibility, I limited my dog's range, locking him in a reinforced cage near the barn when I wasn't home, feeding him by hand, promising him this was temporary, even though he didn't understand the words, only the tone. Each night he whined softly, confused but loyal, trusting me anyway. Karen reappeared gradually, not as an enforcer, but as a presence, dropping off cookies I never touched, complimenting my fences with an enthusiasm that felt rehearsed, asking about my water supply, my generators, my fuel storage, all disguised as neighborly curiosity. Once she stood too long watching my dog, head tilted, asking casually whether the cage was fireproof, and I laughed it off, missing the blade hidden inside the joke. Looking back, every word was a breadcrumb. Around that time, she mentioned something that barely registered then but screams now in hindsight, telling me the HOA had recently updated its emergency preparedness protocols, bragging about how the board maintained spare keys to several properties for safety reasons, keys meant to be used only during floods, fires, or medical emergencies. Keys she said were logged and controlled, said with a proud little smile like she was showing off a medal. I remember nodding politely, assuming it didn't apply to me, assuming she didn't have access to my home because why would she, and because the human brain avoids danger when danger sounds too bureaucratic to be real. Strange things followed. An HOA surveyor wandered onto my land without permission, claiming to check boundaries. Another day, I found the latch on my fuel shed loosened, blamed it on wind, coincidence, bad hardware. Karen waved from across the road, friendly as ever, playing the role flawlessly. Her calm became the loudest noise in my life. I doubled patrols, checked locks, called insurance, reviewed my cameras, believing preparation could outrun intent, but Karen noticed everything, asking about blind spots, joking about response times, praising preparedness with an admiration that felt almost intimate. Each interaction felt like standing near a coiled wire. I still believed vigilance was enough, unaware I was already inside her plan. On the morning it happened, I left early to buy supplies, trusting routine like armor, convinced that if I stuck to patterns, chaos wouldn't find me. Halfway back, a column of smoke clawed the sky near my land, thick and wrong, and my heart dropped so fast it felt like falling through my own chest. Tires screamed as I sped back, calling the fire department, shouting coordinates through a mouth gone dry while dread flooded every thought. Sirens promised help, but flames don't wait. When I reached the fence, panic ruled. Livestock scattered, some already burning, others collapsing in blind terror, heat punching my lungs as I ran through smoke, coughing, throwing water, dirt, anything I could grab. That's when I saw her. Karen stood near the fuel shed, gripping a petrol gallon, calm as a statue, wearing a smirk that froze time itself. Our eyes met, and she didn't run. Flames roared louder. I tried to reach her, but another sound tore through everything. My dog.
His cage was engulfed, flames wrapping the metal bars, the lock glowing red as he howled once and then went silent. Something inside me broke so completely I could almost hear it snap. I collapsed into ash, sobbing, watching my life burn, while somewhere in the background my cameras kept recording, silently capturing her movements, the gasoline, the confidence, the spare keys she'd never needed to use, because the fire was already enough.
The fire burned itself out long before the truth did, leaving behind blackened beams, scorched soil, twisted metal, and a silence so dense it pressed against my ears until my head rang. And as firefighters moved through the ruins, their boots crunching over ash and debris, I stood there, numb, answering questions on autopilot, my eyes fixed on the outline of what used to be my life. Karen was already gone by then, vanished the moment the last flames died, leaving chaos vibrating in the air like a lingering echo. Neighbors gathered at the edges of my property, whispering, filming, shaken. The same people who once warned me about her now staring at the destruction as if trying to comprehend how authority could rot into something this violent. Insurance adjusters arrived within hours, investigators followed close behind, and timelines began stacking on clipboards thicker than any HOA rulebook she ever wielded. That night, after the smoke thinned and the adrenaline finally drained from my veins, I sat alone and reviewed my security footage frame by frame, hands steady in a way my chest was not, watching Karen enter my property hours before the fire with a confidence that told me everything I needed to know. She didn't hesitate at the doors. She didn't force a lock. She didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. She simply used a key, one of the HOA emergency spare keys she always claimed were strictly regulated, meant only for floods, medical emergencies, or catastrophic safety risks, turning my lock as if it belonged to her. The cameras captured it cleanly, her walking through my home, checking rooms, scanning walls, testing doors, disabling nothing because she didn't need to, then stepping back outside with the same calm precision, only to return later carrying gasoline, igniting multiple points like someone following a rehearsed checklist. Fire doesn't erase evidence, it refines it, and every timestamp sharpened the truth she thought flames would bury. Investigators synchronized my CCTV footage with traffic cameras, fuel station receipts, phone location data, and utility records, stitching her movements together minute by minute until her entire narrative collapsed under its own weight. When they brought her in for questioning, she tried to maintain control, tried to wear grief like armor, tried to frame it as an unfortunate accident, but lies disintegrate when confronted with synchronized clocks. The moment the footage played in the interrogation room, her posture sagged, her jaw clenched, and the air shifted. Charges stacked quickly and mercilessly: aggravated arson, felony animal cruelty, destruction of agricultural property, reckless endangerment, environmental damage, each one heavier and harder to deflect than the last. Bail was denied the same day the judge watched her calmly unlock my door and step inside my home without permission. The financial reckoning arrived next, cold and exact. Forensic accountants calculated everything down to the smallest loss: livestock deaths and future breeding value, destroyed barns, fencing, tools, generators, fuel systems, lost harvest cycles, emergency response costs, soil remediation, investigative labor, and when the final number landed at $2.47 million, it felt clinical, not dramatic. Her house was seized, retirement accounts liquidated, wages garnished indefinitely, every illusion of control stripped away through paperwork and court orders. The criminal sentence followed with the weight of inevitability: 14 years in state prison with a mandatory minimum before parole eligibility, followed by years of supervised release and a lifetime ban from HOA leadership, animal ownership, and property management roles. The HOA itself collapsed under subpoenas and lawsuits. Insurance providers withdrew coverage, residents sued for negligence, elections were placed under court supervision, and the board dissolved under the consequences of enabling her power. Rebuilding my life took time, help, and patience, and justice didn't restore everything the fire destroyed, but it closed the chapter with permanence.
Karen once believed authority made her untouchable. She learned too late that power built on intimidation always leaves fingerprints. I stood in the quiet that followed, alive, finished with pretending, knowing that consequences don't need anger to arrive, only evidence and time.